we would interview for creative writing positions. And I would always ask three questions of people that we were interviewing. One, what was your favorite? Who, this is about influence. Who of the older poets, let's say pre-romantic, has influenced you a lot? Who of the, romantic or turn of the century poets have influenced you a lot? And who of the more contemporary poets? It was always Elizabeth Bishop and Jared Manley Hopkins. So very interesting to me, because they're both such amazing poets, and you can learn so much about poetry and about writing poetry from reading them closely. Elizabeth Bishop has had a rising reputation over the course of her lifetime. She was far less famous, although she, won several really big prizes and so on, but she was far less widely sort of esteemed until the kind of latter years of her life. But let me talk about her biography because it's particularly interesting and it's particularly important for her poetry. She was born in 1911 in Worcester, Massachusetts. Her father was a successful builder, so she was born into a family of some money. But her father died when she was 8 months old. And her mother took her back to where the mother had lived in Nova Scotia, in a little tiny place along the coast called Great Village. And Elizabeth was raised there very lovingly by grandparents. But the tragedy is that her mother went insane when she was about 5 years old, when Elizabeth was about 5 years old. And her mother was committed to a mental institution, and Elizabeth never saw her again. Her mom stayed
Wow.
there until she died in, I think it was 1934. So Elizabeth has this great grief, this great bereaving that characterizes her very early years. But as I said, she was happy with her grandparents. She loved them dearly. They loved her dearly. But living in a tiny village in Nova Scotia didn't offer much in the way of, schooling. So her paternal grandparents took her not a fight, but they just took her to Worcester, Massachusetts to live with them. She didn't like it there. She became very, very ill. She suffered from asthma for her entire life, starting then. But eventually, after several years, her mom's sister, Grace Bulwer, took her to live with her. The mom's sister was poor. Elizabeth was very happy there. She received a lot of love there. And again, it wasn't a transfer that was characterized by enmity. It's just that this child who had these really, you know, griefs and physical afflictions was kind of shunted around from place to place. She went to Vassar and she really thrived there. One friendship she made was with Marianne Moore, who, of course, is a couple decades older, but who was recommended by a librarian at Vassar. So Elizabeth went to visit Marianne Moore, and they became very, very close friends for the whole rest of Marianne Moore's life. They exchanged letters back and forth. Elizabeth wrote, a poem to her. Come visit Miss Moore. It's kind of we're not going to read it, but it's kind of a fun poem. Um, After Elizabeth graduated from Vassar, she traveled for several years. She had inherited money from her father. So she lived in France for several years with Louise Crane. She lived in Florida. She writes wonderfully about Florida. She writes about travel. She writes a lot about travel for the whole of her life. Um, and then eventually, and she was writing poetry at this point. So her first book of poems, which is called North and South, came out in 1946, and it won the Houghton Mifflin Prize. And the first poems that we're looking at today come from this book. She did not write that much. She only published 101 poems in her whole lifetime, which to me is pretty amazing. But as Peter said, or who? No,
T.E.
T.E.
Hume.
Hume only published five, so like whatever. Anyway,
I think they were posthumously published,
yeah.
actually.
Elizabeth Bishop's second book, which is called North and South hyphen A Cold Spring, came out in 1955, and it won the 1956 Pulitzer Prize. Her third book, Questions of Travel, came out in 1965. Her complete poems came out in 1969. and won the National Book Award. Her last book of poems, Geography 3, came out in 1977, and it won, or she won, the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, which is this huge international prize. Her complete poems were published posthumously in 1983. So back to her life. Okay, so in 1951, still in her traveling period, she thought that she would make a voyage by ship down the coast of Brazil. But she ate, and she thought that she would be in Brazil for like 2 weeks. But she apparently died from eating an uncured cashew nut and had to be taken ashore
Whoa.
and hospitalized. There she was taken care of by a wealthy architect from a very prominent Brazilian family named Lota de Mateiro Soares. They became lovers, and Elizabeth Bishop lived in Brazil for the next 12 years. And she writes wonderfully about this, but she was very, very, very private. You know, this was during the days when it was not a matter of comfort to announce that you are lesbian or homosexual. And so she's very closeted about it, but they lived together. She lived as a quote guest or as a quote friend with Lota. They had a passionate relationship. And among other things, Lota built her, I think they lived part of the time up in the sort of foothills of the mountains. And Lota built her a writing studio. But increasingly, Lota, as the member of a prominent family, had to become involved with civic affairs, something about building some huge park or something. And increasingly, the relationship started to disintegrate. Elizabeth suffered not only from asthma, but from alcoholism. She writes about that. And eventually, in the 60s, the relationship fell apart. Elizabeth went back to the States, partly because she had to earn money. Her money from her father's estate had run out. So she took a teaching position at Harvard. Lota in 1967 came to join her there, but within days committed suicide in
Oh
their
my
apartment.
God.
Yeah, it was terrible. So Elizabeth stayed mostly in the States from then on. She did travel back to Brazil from time to time. There were questions of an estate, questions of, you know, so on and so forth that she had to go there and I think kind of fight with Lotus heirs about property and things like that. Excuse me. But mostly she's living, teaching at Harvard during the late 60s and during the 70s. She also had teaching positions at the University of Washington, where she met her sort of late in life lover and companion, Alice Meth Fessel, who became her literary executor. They got together in 1971. And she also taught at MIT, but mostly she was teaching at Harvard, teaching creative writing classes. Apparently, she was like a really strict teacher, did not put up with a whole lot. No, she goes, these kids don't even know the difference between a semicolon and a colon, you know, and they write these oozy, vague poems and whatever.
She
So
was popular,
she
though,
was popular, yeah, but
and
very
she had a
strict.
ping pong table like right inside the front door of her apartment and would play ping pong.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, students would come over and play ping pong. The other really important friendship that I didn't mention yet is her friendship with Robert Lowell. They were dear friends for the whole of their adult lives. They're very different as poets, but they were very, very close to each other and supportive of each other's work. Although Peter's going to talk about Elizabeth Bishop's differences with Robert Lowell late in his publishing career. Um, and Lowell was manic depressive. Every time he would go into a manic phase, he would propose marriage to Elizabeth. You know, so they had this sort of interesting kind of like a ping pong relationship, but they wrote to each other and they wrote for each other. And her elegy for Robert Lowell is really, really beautiful. It's called North Shore. It's one of the last poems that she published in her lifetime. So that's just a little bit about her life. As I said, her poetry all is it's highly perfected. She would take sometimes decades to finish a poem. She would put it up on a bulletin board in front of her desk, and it would have a place where she needed the word, you know. and she would wait until that correct word came and then finish the poem. Her beautiful poem, The Moose, was half finished for something like 17 years. And then she finally was able to finish it. So she's a perfectionist as a poet. Her poems are kind of inimitably beautiful and veiled in such interesting ways. There's so much going on there. There's so much feeling behind the kind of beautiful, beautiful surface of her work. So let's start out now by
Uh,
going
I have a
to okay,
couple of questions about her life first, Dan.
okay, okay.
She seemed to have had a rather humble upbringing, but then all of a sudden she's at Vassar. How does that happen?
That
Uh,
was through her Worcester grandparents. She had a lot of money on the father's side of the family. Her mother's side of the family were very humble, economically humble. And if you've been in that part of Nova Scotia, you know that there's tiny, tiny villages along the coast. She writes about that in one of her most beautiful poems, The Moose. But her father's
okay,
family was, they had money. And she
okay,
was
and
a really good student, so she got into Vassar and went there.
second question is, she's at Vassar, and then the next thing you hear, I didn't get the dates properly, I don't think, but she's got a volume of poetry published with Houghton Mifflin, and how did that happen? I mean, all of a sudden she's a published poet.
No, no, she was publishing poems all along, individual poems. She graduated from Vassar in early 20s. She traveled a lot. She was publishing individual poems in journals and stuff. And then, but rather late, sure, she's already in her 30s, although I was in my 50s by the time I published a book of poems, okay? But she's in her 30s when North and South comes out. But she's been, you don't just kind of arrive on the scene with a book. You start out with
Yeah,
individual
that's what I
poems.
was wondering.
You start out with individual poems in journals. So she's publishing in
Hmm.
journals. And Miriam Moore was a mentor to her, not only an advisor, like Elizabeth Bishop was all set to go to medical school. And Miriam Moore said, do not go to medical school. You're a poet, right? And they kept in close touch. Elizabeth Bishop would send her poems as she was working on them. Miriam Moore would comment on them. And so there was that kind of mentorship going on. Elizabeth Bishop also knew other poets. She was reading poetry. She was friends with Robert Lowell. And so she's building this poetic identity and this
Okay.
poetic career slowly, 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 but she isn't rushing into print. Notice that there's like pretty much a decade between each of her books, which is, that happens, but that's not necessarily the pace at which poets as good as she is bring out new books, you know. Other questions? No? Okay, well, let's go into
Okay.
screen sharing, and look at some poems. We're going to start with The Man Moth, and I actually have a book that I can use so I can actually see the print. This is page 13 in my book. I would recommend, by the way, getting the complete poems 1927 to 1979. It's a wonderful book, and it's not big. It's pretty small. The Man Moth. There's a note, of course, that says this is a newspaper misprint for Mammoth. Here above, cracks in the buildings are filled with battered moonlight. The whole shadow of man is only as big as his hat. It lies at his feet like a circle for a doll to stand on, and he makes an inverted pin, the point magnetized to the moon. He does not see the moon. He observes only her vast properties, feeling the queer light on his hands, neither warm nor cold, of a temperature impossible to record in thermometers. But when the man moth pays his rare, although occasional visits to the surface, the moon looks rather different to him. He emerges from an opening under the edge of one of the sidewalks and nervously begins to scale the faces of the buildings. He thinks the moon is a small hole at the top of the sky, proving the sky quite useless for protection. He trembles, but must investigate as high as he can climb. Up the facades, the shadow dragging like a photographer's cloth behind him. He climbs fearfully, thinking that this time he will manage to push his small head through that round, clean opening and be forced through as from a tube in black scrolls on the light. Man standing below him has no such illusions. But what the man moth fears most, he must do, although he fails, of course, and falls back scared, but quite unhurt. Then he returns to the pale subway of cement he calls his home. He flits, he flutters, and cannot get aboard the silent trains fast enough to suit him. The doors close swiftly. The man moth always seats himself facing the wrong way, and the train starts at once at its full, terrible speed, without a shift in gears or a gradation of any sort. He cannot tell the rate at which he travels backwards. Each night he must be carried through artificial tunnels and dream recurrent dreams. Just as the ties recur beneath his train, these underlie his rushing brain. He does not dare look out the window, for the third rail, the unbroken draft of poison, runs there beside him. He regards it as a disease he has inherited the susceptibility to. He has to keep his hands in his pockets, as others might wear mufflers. If you catch him, hold up a flashlight to his eye. It's all dark pupil, an entire night itself, whose haired horizon tightens as he stares back and closes up the eye. Then from the lids, one tear, his only possession, like the bee's sting, slips. Slyly, he palms it, and if you're not paying attention, he'll swallow it. However, if you watch, he'll hand it over, cool as from underground springs and pure enough to drink. So, what an extraordinary poem to get from a typo in a newspaper. The man, you know, most of us would look at that and say, oh, okay, they mean mammoth. But if we look closely at this poem, I think it's a kind of very, very veiled autobiography, you know? The whole of shadow of man is only as big as his hat. He does not see the moon. He observes only her vast properties. But this strange creature, the man moth, man, part moth, part human, part creature, crawls up from beneath the sidewalk and nervously begins to scale the faces of the buildings, begins to attempt transcendence from this subterranean place, this hidden place beneath the sidewalks, scaling up toward the moon. He's convinced that there's a hole in the sky, that the moon is a hole in the sky, and that if he climbs far enough, he'll be able to get through that hole into the realm of light. He will be black scrolls on the light. What he fears most, he must do, although he fails, of course, and falls back scared, but quite unhurt. So, Elizabeth, I just was reading an article about her poetry, talking about the horizontal nature of her travels, and sometimes the desire for transcendence or the desire for there to be a transcendent realm, but the inability to attain that or to actually have it exist. And I think that's what we're seeing here too. Can't get through that hole in the sky to the realm of light, falls back. Then he returns to the subways, enters the subway, and faces backward, not toward the future, rushing into the future, looking back toward where he's come from, right? He
Gosh,
doesn't, and he doesn't dare look out the window because there's the third rail. the death rail, the instant electrocution rail, which he regards as a disease he has inherited the susceptibility to, which is a really chilling way to talk about your own, deeply buried susceptibility to suicide. He has to keep his hands in his pockets as others might wear mufflers. Protect your throat, protect your body. And then if you catch him, look at him, gaze into his eye. It's all black there, that is to say, and it can close. His haired horizon tightens as he stares back and closes up the eye. And then one tear comes from that eye. One tear, his only possession, like a bee sting. Slyly, he palms it. And if you're not paying attention, he'll swallow it. But if you look closely, if you watch, he'll hand it to you. It's a gift, cool as from underground springs and pure enough to drink. So, questions about this poem? Notice how regular it is. Notice how each stanza begins with this indented line. And then there are seven more lines. It's very regular. One, two, three, four, five, six stanzas. It's very even in its presentation. There's nothing jagged about its presentation. The lines are pretty much the same length all the way through. Free verse poem, speaking voice, but a highly regulated, highly controlled, highly expressive speaking voice. And it just gives us this sci-fi creature, this fantasy creature like Batman or Superman or Mighty Mouse or any of those creatures trailing the black shadow like a photographer's cape,
Well,
scanning the buildings. Yeah,
it's a wild piece of hallucination. I thought, the moth crawling out from the sidewalk and then up the scaling up, trying to get through the hole in the sky, which, by the way, comes from Anaximenes, a Greek that, and I think inherited by Aristotle, the idea that the sky was a black dome with holes in it, and
yeah,
outside that dome was pure light. That was the heavenly light. It's a very different thing from thinking there are stars that are bright and the background is black.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like a colander, with holes pierced in it.
Yeah,
Behind that is shining light. I mean, isn't
yeah.
it such a beautiful and such a touching poem once we start really kind of getting inside the kind of imagined psyche of this strange little creature?
I'm just fascinated by the attribution at the beginning that all of this came out of spying a mis mis mispresented newspaper headline. Did she ever talk about this on the side and and interviews or such?
I don't know that. I don't know that, but I mean that is where it came from, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, that's the imagination of a future great poet, seizing upon this thing and developing a whole story out of this one letter, an N instead of an M.
I think she avoided interviews. There may be some, but I don't think there are many.
Yeah. Well, she was interviewed for the Paris Review,
Yeah.
and she talked, and that was later in her life, and she said she refused to be included in feminist anthologies back in the 70s and stuff, but she said, I am a feminist, but I don't want to be defined by, sort of special interest anthologies and stuff. But as far as the man moth, yeah, she's again, that's part of her sort of private self-presentation, you know.
It's interesting to me that in part of the poem, she's kind of, it's more the moth at the beginning, and
Mhm.
then the person goes back to being more of a person riding in the subway. So it's sort of the subject of the poem is part moth and part man, but not at the same time, kind of.
Yeah, yeah,
And the size seems to be indeterminate. Like, is it a moth the size of a man or a man the size of a
yeah,
moth? It
yeah.
could be either.
Yeah. Does anybody know about Japanese anime? Because there's this character called Mothra, but
Oh,
I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure Mothra
Mothra,
is.
Yeah,
oh, Mothra fights with Godzilla.
Godzilla.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Godzilla. It's
Cool. Very
I
cool. But
I got the feeling, after you told us a bit about her life, that when she saw this typo, she recognized qualities that she experienced and
yeah,
said, that's me, and I'm going to very subtly explain to you what it is about the concept of a human that would have moth-like qualities that is me. And
yeah,
my tear is the poem. And
yeah,
you have to really be watching, otherwise I'm so private, I am just going to swallow it.
yeah.
But if you're really watching, I'm going to give you this gift that's pure enough to drink.
I
What a
know. I
great
know.
line.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Such a beautiful poem.
Yeah, I'll agree with Leslie. The last stanza put me in mind of thinking that this was the poet, and
Sure.
that the tear is the distillation of the experience that he or she has gone through,
Sure.
trying to see the light
Yeah,
through the hole
absolutely.
in the sky, and then if you're willing, offering it to you,
Hmm.
and in its most palatable form. It's.
Yes, absolutely. Later on, we'll read a poem called Sestina, which is in some ways very akin to this poem. So let's move on.
I, before we do, I was kind of struck by the importance that she seemed to give to the odd fact that the man moth, when he got on the train, always sat so that he would be moving backwards.
Hmm.
It seems like a significant detail,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I have no idea why.
Well, you're moving into the future, but not looking at the future.
Yeah,
You're looking at where you came from, right? Which is, what she does a lot in her poetry is looking at where she came from, this tragic childhood. She
It
writes
seems
brilliantly about Nova Scotia. She writes about Worcester, Massachusetts. She writes about her childhood. She writes about where she came from. She's on this subway going forward, but looking back, you know? She does sometimes write looking forward, like in her travel poems, but I think that's another way of talking about this enormous burden that she carries hidden within her, you know? Yeah. So let's move on. By the way, Alan, it's nice to see you again. We haven't seen you for a while.
good to be back.
The fish. Yeah, my computer is like so weird. So this is The Fish, and the title wanted to be on one page, and the poem wanted to be on another page, and I could not change that. This is the one that
Okay.
Douglas sent us
A
her
recording
recording.
of, yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite beautiful. I'm gonna read it to you. So this is an eco poem. This is in the Eco Poetry Anthology that I co-published with Laura Gray Street, and it's quite wonderful. The fish. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water, with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there, his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full-blown roses stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice. And underneath, two or three rags of green weed hung down. While his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lenses of old, scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung five old pieces of fish line, or four, and a wire leader with a swivel still attached, with all their five big hooks ground firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, two heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a five-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat. From the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow around the rusted engine to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunnels, until everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go. So I read this really great essay once about this poem because I'd read the poem a bunch of times and never really paid close enough attention to it. And the essay talks about, in a sense, the journey that this poem makes from, it's like, who's the victor here? You know, at the beginning, I caught a tremendous fish. So this is, in a way, Hemingway territory. I caught a tremendous fish. Very likely in Florida. I don't know if she really caught the fish. Very likely so. Held him beside the boat. I say this is Hemingway territory because Hemingway, of course, was a big game fisher and very, very competitive or combative about it. So this huge fish is hanging half out of the water with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. And then it's really brilliant to me the way she both insists on the domestication of the fish, and I'll talk about that in just a second, and the strangeness or wildness or alien nature of the fish. So by domestication, I mean things like this image. Here and there, his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper. She has called this fish homely, which in American English means not pretty, but in English or Canadian English, like her grandparents would have spoken, means home-like. So there's something home-like. That is to say, there's something being at home with this fish. Okay. So it looks like wallpaper. Its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. And you think about, wallpaper in an old house, full-blown roses stained and lost through age. So it's like the skin of this fish somehow looks to her like wallpaper with roses on it, old wallpaper, stained and marked with age. And then we get beautiful images like fine rosettes of lime. You know, a rosette is a beautiful shape. So the speckled fish, she's looking closely at its skin. She's looking closely at it. And then amazing image, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen. And terrible is the word that stops us because it's like, sure, we breathe oxygen, but then we think about this fish breathing oxygen, the gills opening and shutting in agony. And yet the gills also are sharp enough to cut us. So there's that estrangement, you know. I can't remember who it is, talks about art as always needing to focus on some act of making strange, some act of estrangement. And here we get this estrangement between the human and the fish. I thought, and then she starts moving into the body of the fish, imagining into the body of the fish the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, like a feather bed. The big bones and little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, the pink swim bladder like a big peony, right? So we're getting feathers, peony, but at the same time, entrails, the agony of breathing in oxygen, the strangeness of the fish, the beauty of the internal body of the fish. I looked into his eyes. That's great. Looking into his eyes. We look into somebody's eyes. The eyes are the eyes of the soul, say the Renaissance poets. But this fish doesn't look back. This fish's eyes are a lot larger than the human eyes, but they're shallow, which is to say what there's not the same kind of brain at work behind it, whatever that brain might be. They're yellow. The iris is backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, another domestic image. These great images seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. And the accuracy of her images is astonishing. The carefulness of her images. She's like one of the great poets for detail that I've ever read, and for these arresting, fresh details, you know. They shifted a little bit, not to return my steer. There's no looking back at this fish. Instead, she says it's more like tipping an object toward the light. And then she sees the lines hanging from the fish. They're like medals on the breast of a warrior. These lines where the fish has defeated the attempt to catch it, the attempt to subdue it, where the fish has got away, but he still carries the marks of pain, the hooks that have grown into his jaw, like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a five-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. It wouldn't be comfortable to be having five hooks in your jaw for a fish or a human. I stared and stared, and then victory. And you're like, so far in the poem, we might be thinking the victory is the person's victory who caught this huge fish. But all of a sudden, we see, aha, what's going on here? Victory filled up the little rented boat from the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow. God gave Noah a rainbow sign, you know, a rainbow spread around your rusted engine. And this is, of course, the rainbow of oil slick. So it's natural. She's not saying all of a sudden God is in the boat. She's saying if there's oil and there's water, there's going to be this rainbow. The sun cracked towards the oarlocks on the strings, the gunnels, until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And I let the fish go. So that's the journey that this poem has made from, you know, the seeming sports, the difficulty if you're a sports person, but the ease of catching a fish and saying, aha, I caught a fish. Look, I'm the master. I'm the one who's, dominant here. And then looking closely at this other than human creature, looking not only to the outside, what we have in common, or what it might remind us of, old wallpaper, rosettes, but also looking inside, imagining inside to the feathers, the peony, the guts, the order and beauty of the inside of the body. And then looking at the strangeness of this creature that does not return your gaze. This creature which has, won five battles, like a Greek hero, like a hero from the wars. And it just carries the marks of that suffering and the marks of that combat. And she says, I stared and stared, looking at the other, which is like, you know, the beginning of an environmental consciousness is looking at the other. And then all of a sudden, there's this seeming miracle, which is just absolutely naturalistic. The rainbow, rainbow, rainbow of the little rented boat, the little worn out rented boat. She says, rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And I let the fish go.
There's an interesting pivot on victory when it first
Yeah.
appears, because in one sense, it's her victory. She has caught a fish that five sport fishermen failed to catch, even when they had their hook in its jaw. And then it becomes, of course, the fish's victory, but it really is both, I think. And she does have that feeling that I think any sportsman would have at that point, I caught this fish, and five other fishermen failed to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And they were probably guys.
Probably, but whether they were or
I'm
not,
teasing and making a
no,
joke.
I mean, they probably were.
Yeah,
And that is probably part of why she has a sense of victory, but, the real victory becomes the fishes.
yeah.
I think I was um, really interested in the line about the evidence of the previous battles, these hooks being the five-haired beard of wisdom,
Mhm.
because I also feel like, okay, that was the fish's experience that he became a pretty canny fish, I imagine, after that experience. But it seems at that point to transfer some of the wisdom transfers to her. And the fact that she's aware that a fish drowns in air,
Hmm.
which is such a reversal for us. But
Hmm.
a fish is drowning in air, and to be that aware of that makes it not other. It makes her sort of inhabit the fish, so that
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
you look inside the fish, and then this the images of where the rainbow comes from. It's sort of interesting, though, that it's rusted engine, sun cracked thwarts, and this oil that's spilled onto the water because it's got a leak somehow, and it, to me, I think that's sort of where the change starts placing, so that when we say victory, that's, it's obvious it's not her, it's both of their victory. I mean, it's
Yeah.
her victory in the sense she got that wisdom too, and she's going to let the fish go.
And she wrote the poem.
I found this, there's such a jar sorry. I found this such a jarring an amazing shift of viewpoint, just like in the previous poem, where we have a superhero climbing a building and now all of a sudden he's on a subway going backwards. And now we're, from an extremely detailed examination of this fish, suddenly we're looking at the boat and
Hmm.
how, kind of insignificant and poorly put together it is compared to this fish. And I'm just excited by that, encountering that and look forward to more of it.
Yeah, that's great. That's nice. So let's look at one more poem. Oh, over 2000. Oh, this is okay. Okay, Breton. Okay. I love this poem. I love this poem. So you know where Cape Breton Island is? It's to the north of Nova Scotia, and we were there on vacation a few years ago.
It's part of Nova
Yeah, I
Scotia.
know.
It's the
I know, but that's what I'm saying.
northeastern third of the whole
That's what I just said it wrong.
province.
Okay, page 67. And I'll tell you why, after I read this poem, I'll tell you why I love it so much. Cape Breton. Out on the high bird islands, Cebu and Hertford, the razor bill auks and the silly looking puffins all stand with their backs to the mainland in solemn, uneven lines along the cliff's brown, grass frayed edge, while the few sheep pastured there go ba, ba. Sometimes, frightened by aeroplanes, they stampede and fall over into the sea or onto the rocks. The silken water is weaving and weaving, disappearing under the mist equally in all directions, lifted and penetrated now and then by one shag's dripping serpent neck. And somewhere the mist incorporates the pulse, rapid but unurgent, of a motorboat. The same mist hangs in thin layers among the valleys and gorges of the mainland like rotting snow ice sucked away almost to spirit. The ghosts of glaciers drift among these folds and folds of fir, spruce and hackmattock, dull, dead, deep peacock colors, each riser distinguished from the next by an irregular, nervous, sawtooth edge, alike but certain as a stereoscopic view. The wild road clambers along the brink of the coast. On it stand occasional small yellow bulldozers, but without their drivers because today is Sunday. The little white churches have been dropped into the matted hills like lost quartz arrowheads. The road appears to have been abandoned. Whatever the landscape had of meaning appears to have been abandoned unless the road is holding it back in the interior where we cannot see, where deep lakes are reputed to be, and disused trails and mountains of rock and miles of burnt forest standing in gray scratches like the admirable scriptures made on stones by stones. And these regions now have little to say for themselves except in thousands of light sparrow songs floating upward freely, dispassionately through the mist and meshing in brown wet, fine, torn fish nets. A small bus comes along in up and down rushes, packed with people, even to its step. On weekdays with groceries, spare automobile parts, and pump parts, but today only two creatures extra, one carrying his frock coat on a hanger. It passes the closed roadside stand, the closed schoolhouse, where today no flag is flying from the rough adzed pole topped with a white china doorknob. It stops, and a man carrying a baby gets off, climbs over a stile, and goes down through a small, steep meadow which establishes its poverty in a snowfall of daisies to his invisible house beside the water. The birds keep on singing, a calf bawls, the bus starts. The thin mist follows the white mutations of its dream. An ancient chill is rippling the dark brooks. So let's come back out of screen share because this is
Can I
kind of
ask a question first? And
yeah,
our version says a man carrying a bay gets off. It's baby, right?
yeah, it's just it's a
Typo.
misprint. It's a
Okay.
misprint on not my misprint, but I was like, copying it from the internet. Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely got to be a baby.
Okay. Got
The
it.
baby. I'm sorry I didn't even see that because I could have corrected it. So the thing about Cape Breton Island is that there's exactly one road that goes around it. Like we went there thinking that we would be able to take all these long hikes and stuff, but you can't really because there's this road that goes up and around the top and down the other side. And there's a couple of like smallish roads that go like down to the beach and stuff, where there's like, for instance, a Tibetan Buddhist monastery right on the water. It's just amazingly gorgeous. But essentially, you've got this road which signifies human presence, human habitation that goes up and comes around. And then the interior of the land is mostly impenetrable as forest, right? And
You could get into it, but it's very rough country and there don't seem to be any trails maintained.
yeah,
So we were not up to doing that.
right, right. Bushwhacking. Yeah, exactly. So what's happening here, what's so beautiful to me is the way it reverses the balance between human presence and other than human presence. The human presence here is minuscule. You've got these little houses that look like quartz arrowheads. You've got this little school, these little churches, right? You've got people, whose transportation is the bus. And usually that's how they get around. They go up and they go, whatever to wherever they live, but it's only on one road. And then my favorite thing about this poem is the way the man and the baby vanish. They get off the bus, they climb over a stile, they go down through a field, she says, whose poverty is indicated by the fact that it's full of daisies, which is to say, it's not arable. It's just this steep meadow. And they go down. And she doesn't follow them down. She lets them just disappear. I mean, we know they're okay, you know, but they live there. They live where we can't see them. They live in our imaginations. He's probably like a fisherman, you know. He's probably got a wife because he's a baby. He's got one of those little houses. Yeah, Leslie? Can't hear you.
It's not a baby. I looked up 4 different versions. It's Bay, and that's why I
Oh, it
had
is
the
Bay.
question.
No, it's
Yeah,
baby. It's in my room. It's in my complete.
really? Because all the versions online, including hand calligraphy ones, all say Bay.
Well, they're wrong. It's
Okay,
baby.
interesting that everybody else copied the same error.
Yeah.
I know. It's so insane. No,
But
it's a
how
baby.
would you carry a bay?
I don't know. That's why I had a big question mark.
I
What
know.
does that
Well,
It's
mean?
a baby. And that's the poignancy of it, is that this life is going on where we can't see it. And then we realize most of the life in the entire world is going on where we can't see it, you know? And it's there, but it's beyond our vision. And then the other than human life is all around us in this poem, from the birds, at the very beginning, um, the ox and the puffins. There used to be a lot of puffins, the sheep going bah, bah, and then, the grim humor of the sheep getting scared by an airplane and falling off the edge, right? And the beautiful water and the mist. And somewhere there's a motorboat, but we can't really see the motorboat. We just, it's incorporated by the mist, and we hear it chug, like that. The same mist. And then we move inland, imagining what's in there. She hasn't been there. She hasn't been to that inland place. But it's a magical place. It's ancient beyond ancient, you know. The ghosts of glaciers, the folds of fur, the peacock colors, the mountains, ridge beyond ridge, the stereoscopic view. So you've got the water, you've got the mountains, you've got the mist, you've got the birds, and then you've got this one skinny little road, which is built not very successfully by humans, maintained by humans whose lives are lived there, but mostly unseen. Yeah,
Yeah,
very.
I think I see a common pattern between among the 3 poems, of someone who observes really closely what she can see and finds beauty in really amazing metaphors and similes for how she describes it. But she never quite gets to the core of it. She keeps looking carefully and closely, even inside, like with the fish, and imagining the moth's world. But there's this kind of deep mystery that she never quite gets to. It's really quite beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's an amazing poet, and her amazingness reveals itself slowly and like with rereading, because she's not offering the same kind of emotional drama that, for instance, the confessional poets do. You know, um, she's perfecting these poems. She's working on them, slowly, and it pays to read them over and over and over again, and to kind of just let your imagination go where she's going. I love her work. I really do. So we have just a few minutes to talk a little bit about your first impressions of Elizabeth Bishop, and then we'll move on next time. We're going to spend the next 20 years on Elizabeth Bishop. I once took an English course at Claremont Grad School with Robert Messi, and it was called English Poetry from something like 1900 to, or I don't know, 1870 to the present or something. We spent most of the semester on Thomas Hardy because he loved Thomas Hardy. And he kept saying, okay, we're not moving on yet. We're reading more Thomas Hardy week after week after week after week. So we're not going
That's like Richard Barnes' overview of Joyce, where he did nothing in the class but read from Finnegan's Wake.
to. Oh my God, that's crazy. That's funny.
The first 2 poems reminded me of really clear dreams that you were able to observe and remember in detail, but you knew they could not literally have happened. I mean, I was really struck by the fish not having resisted at all. It hadn't
Mm,
fought.
Mhm.
I thought, well, that couldn't be. A big fish, especially that had overcome being caught 4 or 5 times in the past, would fight. I mean, it's unimaginable to me that you could hook and pull in a big fish that would just be passive. And I mean, and so it felt like a dream to me. Um,
Similarly, the the description of the viscera of the fish are descriptions you would have only if you open the fish up,
yeah,
Yeah,
but
Yeah.
aren't in that appearance when they're in the darkness inside the fish.
right, right.
Mm.
That's interesting that you say that they're like dreams. That's really interesting. I mean, unless this fish is, ready to die and in a sense presenting itself to her, then it might not fight. But I think you make a really good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Alan, I beg to differ, but my one of two fish I've caught in my life um, was on a little lake in Oregon, and it didn't really fight at all. It was quite large, but it turned out it was full of roe. I wasn't supposed to have caught it. So,
oh,
so maybe there are circumstances when the fish has just had enough.
Mm.
More babies. Yeah.
We don't know how much of a fight there was before the fish is brought into view.
Other comments?
Well, when I was reading this last poem, I was thinking that Gerard Manley Hopkins would be really proud because I read that he was an influence too, and like the ghosts of glaciers and the folds and folds of her and the dull, dead, deep peacock colors.
Yeah.
Wow. When she,
Yeah.
but it doesn't seem overdone while you're reading it, but it has I think the not only the alliterations, but the timing, like the dead, dull, deep, the slowing down of the line like that is really
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And he's amazing as he writes about nature too, like she is. Yeah. Yeah, she cited him as a really important influence for her, along with Miriam Moore. And you can see the same kind of care in Miriam Moore's poetry that we looked at. You remember all the weird details. Um, yeah. And Baudelaire was a big influence on her too. We so far haven't really seen the Baudelaire too much, but she talked about his ability to write about urban situations and with a kind of dispassionate gaze. She's a very dispassionate person, although there's a lot of poetry behind, a lot of feeling behind that. Other comments? Julia?
Oh, I was, thinking there were a couple of comments I had in the first two poems. One is for the Mothman, I mean the man moth. I saw it as a shadow for the until it went back down in the subway because the shadow kind of grew and went up the side of I could see it as a shadow going up the building and kind of taking off toward the oculus or whatever of the moon, um, and then being lost and spun
Oh,
off
yeah.
down but then it fell apart, so I was very interested in how everybody followed it, talked about the image. And on the fish, um, I didn't see it as a giant trophy type fish, but it was in a boat mainly because I fished with my father when I was a little girl on boats and lakes, and a rented boat, and if the fish at the side, and what I knew about the inside of a fish was from cleaning it afterwards and watching my dad do that, um, and being kind of appalled, but kind of fascinated at the same time. And so I kind of read it more as choosing not to eat it, uh, kind of is sort of underneath, not like a big thought, but um, the feather, the even the feathers of stuffed. That's what fish flesh is kind of
Yeah.
like.
Flaky.
Yes, yes, and so uh, it was. Those were kind of the thoughts falling in my mind, and I'd like to read more of,
Yeah.
especially that about that region and well, I mean, I guess my early experience were a lot of the kind of places that she wrote about.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I've lived all over, but we lived on the East Coast in Maryland when I was 6 to 9, and we went on vacations up to Canada, and actually I have a like a three great grandfather who was a fishing captain from Nova Scotia who died
Well,
in a big storm on the cove that Gulliver's Cove. Um, I always have to think of Jonathan Swift to remember, but so um, I yeah, so there's that. But it was uh, fishing on lakes in Canada.
that's so cool.
Yeah, and fishing. We've read some more things about fishing in this poetry earlier on. That was such a manly. It's like all boys did it, and fathers taught their sons. Um, and I might have been the tail end in our family. I wasn't a son, but I didn't really carry it on. Let's put it that way. Um, but I don't know. All these connections to. I'm sorry. That's.
Oh, that's cool. That's
Yeah.
very cool.
I bet she's fishing on a lake because I agree with Alan, a big marlin or tuna or something would fight. But
Yeah.
it's quite possible a big lake fish might not.
Hmm.
And that boat could do okay on a lake, but it doesn't sound as if it
Yeah.
should be
Yeah.
on the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think my interpretation was influenced by her description of the eyes being big, larger
Ah,
than,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it didn't remind me of a trout or even a bass,
Oh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
those big eyes.
Well, guys, we have more wonderful Elizabeth Bishop poems to look at for next time. I'm excited.
And I think I might have her somewhat mixed up. There's another author who wrote stories and maybe a novel or two whose name is something like Elizabeth Bishop, but I think she's British or Irish and wrote in World War II times. And I don't know who I need to run up to my library and see
Yeah. There
who
is
I'm.
a British writer named see, yeah, named Elizabeth Taylor. But
No?
I mean, there's
Elizabeth Bowen.
oh, Elizabeth
That's
Bowen.
who. That's who.
Elizabeth
I
Bowen. She
think
was
so.
Irish, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Bowen. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Elizabeth Bishop did write a little bit of fiction and she wrote a little bit of kind of prose poems. And she also did really wonderful translations from the Portuguese when she was living in Brazil.
Mm.
So, there's more to explore. Okay, I will see you guys next time. Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Let's hope
Thanks, Ann.
Douglas can get back out from under the snow and ice.
Right.